So as mentioned, just get a pen and paper ready, and I'll let Jayson take it away.
Hi guys, how are you? First off, I want to say thank you very much for coming. I know there is 1,000,001 webinars going on at the minute, so I appreciate you coming to see ours. And I know this is free today, but I suppose your time is probably the most valuable thing you have, which you probably realize if you're coming to a webinar on procrastination. So I might get started. Just a little bit of housekeeping first. So I intend to use the chat box extensively today, just to try and suppose keep you guys engaged a little bit, but also so I can have some feedback. So I suppose if I'm going too fast or if I'm going too slow, or if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat box and I'll try and get to them. If I don't get to questions during the actual talk, I will be doing a Q&A afterwards. It might go on a little bit after 12:30 for that, but you can ask them then either. So just to check, if you could let me know in the chat box, how is everyone doing today? Everyone good? Very quiet in the chat. Oh, here we go. Fantastic, good, thanks. Doing great. Thank you, Carmen. Thanks, Rosie. Cheers. Good to see you guys all here. Super. Okay, awesome. As I was saying a minute ago, if you guys, if you can get your hands on a pen and a piece of paper, it'll be very useful for this. Okay. So, I suppose for those of you who don't know me, I'm just going to introduce myself a little bit. So, my name is Jayson Mourne, and I am a coaching psychologist. So, I help people increase their impact by increasing their effectiveness. So, I suppose what I do really, I suppose, is, you know, those really important things you need to get done. I help people do those things. And I do this by looking and helping them look at 3 kind of key areas. So the first is I help people to better understand themselves. So we're kind of looking at that question of, you know, who you are, where you're at. So we look at things like we might do a personality assessment. We might have a look at the balance in your life or your performance in different areas of your career or of your business. So that's kind of where you're at now. The second area that I help people with is I help them to better understand what it is that they want. You know, where do they want to go? What are their goals? So we might look at how those goals are structured. Are they put together in such a way that makes it more likely that you'll achieve them? Are you like super clear about them? Are they in line with really what's important for you? Are they in line with the person that you are? So the third area that I tend to look at with people are what's getting in the way to achieving your goals. So what are the barriers? And so barriers for me can be both practical and psychological. So practical barriers might include things like getting organized, maybe making decisions, maybe having like a system to deal with all your inputs and outputs, etc. More psychological barriers might be things like stress, which can really get in the way, confidence, motivation, and the topic of today's talk, procrastination. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about procrastination, what it is exactly, how we procrastinate, why we procrastinate, and then we're going to look at some tips, tools, and techniques in order to get you started and hopefully get you started with a little bit less pain and a little bit quicker. So hopefully reduce your procrastination. Okay. So I was going to do a little bit of a warm up. We might be a little bit tight on time. I'm kind of conscious that this is supposed to be over half. So I might just jump right into the material. So first off, I suppose, what is procrastination? So if you guys could maybe let me know in the chat box, what do you understand by procrastination, or what do you think procrastination is? Putting things off, very good. Putting things off also. Not doing your most important task first, very good. I would say that's maybe more prioritization, but we'll get to that in a minute. Delaying decisions. So decisions isn't something I go at specifically today, but if you maybe want, we can talk about that in the Q&A afterwards. It's a very important point. Avoiding responsibilities, the wonderful word of avoidance. Very good. Well, so the dictionary definition, or the psychological textbook definition, is that procrastination is putting off until later what our better judgment tells us we should do now. So it's very hard, really. It is about avoidance. What it's about avoiding immediate discomfort. And we often avoid this immediate discomfort by doing something else that we find a little bit less uncomfortable. So, for example, what I often do when I procrastinate is, funnily enough, I'll clean. Yeah? Other strategies I'll use is I'll watch Netflix, or I'll go into YouTube. And this is kind of brings up the question is, you know, when you're procrastinating, are you just being lazy? And I'd have to say no, because when we're lazy, what we tend to do is we want to do less of something or not do anything at all. When we procrastinate, we tend to do other tasks. Yeah. So why care? Well, I suppose the main reason I care is a couple of years ago, I was trying to get my master's thesis done. I had the whole summer to do it, and I was having some health issues. And because of the health issues, my energy was very low. Nothing serious, but it was just knocking my energy off a little bit. And because my energy was low, my motivation was low. So I was really struggling to get this thing done. I was procrastinating a lot. So a lot of the material and stuff here is from some research I'd done around procrastination around that time to try and get myself moving on that master's thesis. I'll get back to those exact strategies later. But I suppose in terms of why I think it's important, well, first off, I suppose the more we procrastinate, the less productive we are. The longer it takes us to start those important things, then the longer it takes us to get them done. And I suppose one of the key issues with this is I found when I was doing my master's thesis is that I would procrastinate all morning and afternoon. I would maybe start getting going in the evening, and then I'd end up working late to make up. And so when we procrastinate, we tend to procrastinate on things that we need to do, which we'll eventually do anyway. And so that leaves us less times for things that we want to do. So I suppose procrastination makes us less productive, but that usually ends up with us doing things that or means we do less things that are important to us, like socializing and stuff like that. The second issue I have with procrastination is that it makes that we have less enjoyment from what I call the tools of procrastination. So these are these tasks or other things that we do in order to avoid doing the thing that we want to do. So I suppose to get this, I want you to imagine that you're watching an episode of your favorite Netflix show. I'm watching Money Heist. I'm not sure if I love it or hate it. But I want you to imagine watching that episode, but you're watching it as a reward for having done a task that was really important and you had to get done. So maybe it was cleaning out that manky bathroom or filing those tax returns. How might you feel? Maybe let me know in the chat box. So you're watching that episode as a reward for having done something that you've been putting off. It's deserved. Yeah, cool. Anyone else? You enjoy it? Yeah? Yeah? So you're feeling satisfied. Now, I want you to imagine watching that exact same episode of that exact same show, but you're doing it to avoid doing the exact same task. So you're using that episode of your favorite Netflix show to procrastinate. How might you feel then? Maybe let me know in the chat box. Sorry. A little bit of anxiety, yeah? Guilt. Guilt is another one. Yeah, exactly. So you're a little bit distracted. It's always sitting, not shitting, sitting on your shoulder. So it means that you're not really getting as much enjoyment out of the actual thing that you would normally enjoy. So that's a little bit less obvious, but something that really annoys me about procrastination. Okay, so what do we tend to procrastinate about? We tend to procrastinate in three kind of key areas. The first is personal maintenance. So this might be things like, starting that gym routine. Maybe it's starting that diet that you need to start, but it doesn't have to be physical maintenance. It can be mental maintenance too. So maybe it's, finally booking in with that counselor or starting that stress reduction program. So basically the first area is in terms of minding ourselves. The second area that we tend to procrastinate on is more got to do with our personal development. The reason I have a guitar there is I have a guitar sitting in my living room for the last 18 months. And I've really been meaning to pick it up. So personal development is about learning new skills, new hobbies. So maybe it's starting that night course. Maybe it's learning that instrument. Maybe it's taking on that little bit of extra thing in work that you wanted to learn. Yeah. So the third area that we tend to procrastinate on are tasks that are given to us from external sources. And the reason I've got a picture of our boss baby up there, this is a very common one. You might procrastinate about something given to you by your boss in work. Other examples of this might be maybe email is another external source. So it's anything that's given to us from an external source. So I want to get a little bit more specific now, and I want you guys to pick one task or habit that you're procrastinating about right now. And I want you to take that pen and a piece of paper I was talking about earlier, and I want you to draw a triangle, and I want you to write whatever it is you're procrastinating about in the middle of the triangle. Pretty much like what's on the screen. There's no need for me to draw it badly, I suppose. Feel free to put if you're comfortable about it, feel free to put in the chat box what you're procrastinating about. I suppose the example I'm using here is starting strength training. So over the course of COVID, I've managed to get a nice cardio kind of habit started. So I kind of do 15, 20 minutes of cardio every day, but I've really been putting off starting to lift, kind of move to the next level and start lifting some weights. And it's probably because I think it's going to be sore. Okay. Has everyone got something that they're procrastinating about and have drawn the triangle? Maybe let me know in the chat box. Yeah. Cool. Everyone else? Yeah? Okay, awesome. Okay, cool. So I suppose one of the first things I want to have a look at is how we go about procrastinating. What are these strategies that we use to procrastinate? So I suppose there's particular behaviors that we tend to do. So for example, we might overthink. So this is often known as paralysis by analysis. This is where we can't decide whether to do A or B, so we don't get either done. Kind of linked is the idea of we can find excuses. You know, there's always something else to do or something more important to do. And very much linked to the idea that sometimes unimportant tasks suddenly become important. I know when I had to get my master's thesis done, I actually spent an entire day clearing out the spare room that had been sitting in dereliction for like 2 years. And suddenly that became much more important than starting my master's thesis. Often we'll say, you know, I'll do it when the stars align, when everything is perfect. And the issue with this is perfect conditions very rarely arise. Or I'll do it tomorrow. And as the terrible Garth Brooks song says, tomorrow often never comes. Sometimes we label ourselves as slow, lazy, or stupid. That's where we're saying, you know, we're not able, when really usually what's going on is we don't really want to do whatever the task is. More kind of behaviorally, this is a very common one, is leaving things until the last minute because you don't really want to do it. You put it off for as long as possible and you hope that you're kind of going to get it done in the shortest period of time, and that little bit of stress will kind of make it a little bit easier to do. But often we leave things until the last minute, they don't get done at all. Sometimes we create the illusion of starting. This is a personal favorite of mine. I will clean the space I'm going to work in. I will clean down my computer. I will put all my pencils exactly perpendicular to each other and get everything set up. And then I'll go, oh, I've been doing this for half an hour now. I need a break, and I'll go make a coffee. So I don't really start at all. And giving ourselves the reward before the task. So this is very much linked to that Netflix idea. The issue with giving ourselves the reward before the task is we don't really have anything to motivate us to do it, or we don't really get that sense of pleasure afterwards. You know? And finally, this is one that people come to me a lot, is that they're waiting to feel motivated before they start doing it. And I suppose the issue with this is that feeling of motivation, it actually comes more so just after you start, because just after you start to make a little bit of progress. You can see you're kind of putting a dent in that big problem or whatever it is. And that's when you start to feel good usually, not just before, it's just after you start. Okay. So what I want you to do, I want you to take your triangle, and in the bottom right-hand corner, I want you to write what behavior you're using to procrastinate. So in my instance, when I'm starting strength training, the behavior I usually do to avoid doing it is I'll get up in the morning, and rather than going straight and set my weights up and starting to lift them, is I'll start cleaning and tidying up. And suddenly I'll spend 20 minutes, half an hour, and then I'm like, oh, I don't have time to work out now. So I want you to try and put in the bottom right-hand corner of your triangle what behavior you're using to procrastinate. Am I making myself clear? Is that making sense? Let me know when everyone's managed to put their finger on what the behavior is. If anyone would like to put into the chat box what behavior you're using to procrastinate, it'd be very interesting, but at the same time, you don't have to either. I understand privacy is probably an issue here. Has everyone got it? Cleaning. Yeah, I don't know why. I normally hate cleaning, but when I'm trying to put something off, I become a clean freak. Overthinking. Using social media, I think, is a big one. Scanning through our phone. The internet. I find YouTube like endless. The illusion of starting. Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to move on. Time's a little bit tight. So why do we procrastinate? So what exactly is going on? Well, to explain this, I'm going to use a model from psychology called the cognitive behavioral model. I suppose don't be put off by the fancy sounding psychological name if you haven't heard of this. Cognitive just stands for thinking, and behavioral is just for action or behaving. So think of it as the thinking and behaving model. So in the cognitive behavioral model, around any given situation, we got 3 possible responses. So first off, we have emotions, or we feel. We have thoughts or beliefs, or we think. And we have behaviors, or we act. So around any given situation, we feel, we think, and we act. So for example, imagine you get up tomorrow morning and you open your computer and you have a raft of 20 emails sitting in front of you. Maybe you think, oh, I don't want to do this. So you're feeling a little bit anxious, and off you go and watch cat videos on YouTube. Yeah. So in any given situation, we've got thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Now, it gets a little more complicated because these thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, they influence and interact with each other. So for example, our emotions can really affect how we think and how we behave. So I don't know if you've ever been really, really angry, and maybe you've thought some really terrible things about the person you're angry with. And as a result, maybe you've said some things that afterwards you regret. So kind of can just show how our emotions can really affect how we think and then how we behave, in this case speaking. So our behaviors can also affect our emotions and our thoughts or belief. So I don't know, have you ever done anything where afterwards you're feeling a little bit of pride? So I know the first time that I spoke in public, afterwards I was feeling, I felt amazing. I felt so proud that I managed to pull it off. And I was thinking to myself, hey, I managed to pull that off. That wasn't so bad. So how we behave can really affect how we feel and how we think. Now, a very important relationship in this triangle in the cognitive behavioral model is that our thoughts and beliefs can affect how we feel and how we think. Yeah. So for example, imagine we get those rafts of emails. We could think, it could mean good news. As a result, we feel excited or happy. And so we crack on and we open up the emails. Now, the fact that our thoughts or beliefs affect how we feel and how we behave, this can help explain why two different people can look at the exact same problem or the exact same situation and have very different emotional and behavioral responses. So somebody else might think, oh, those emails might mean bad news because maybe they've got some bad emails lately. As a result, they could feel a bit anxious or down, and so they don't open the emails. So having different thoughts or beliefs can lead to very different emotional and behavioral reactions to any situation. Is this making sense to people? Maybe just let me know in the chat box if you're with me here. Yeah, okay, great, cool. Awesome. If I'm going too fast or too slow, whatever, guys, feel free to let me know. Thanks. So in the cognitive behavioral model, or I suppose the way we often think about things in our environment, or triggers as we like to call them, for example, waking up to 20 emails, is that it's the actual trigger. It's a thing in the environment that makes us feel certain ways, maybe sad, and act in certain ways, go on YouTube and watch cat videos. However, in the cognitive behavioral model, it's a little bit more complex than that. So the idea is that we've got a trigger, and then we have thoughts and beliefs, or we attach meaning to that trigger. We attach meaning to that situation, and this leads us to do certain things and to feel certain ways. Yeah? So it's a little bit of a difference. So the thoughts and belief, or the meaning, is the important part here. So one more kind of important aspect of the cognitive behavioral model is that there's different levels of thought or belief. So think of our thoughts as like an onion. There's different kind of layers to it. So the first layer is what's called an automatic thought. And so an automatic thought is simply the voice going through your head describing what's going on. It's like our stream of consciousness. So sometimes people will say to me, I don't have a stream of consciousness. I don't have a voice kind of commentating on what's going on right now. And I tell them that the voice that's telling them that they don't have that voice, that's the voice I'm talking about. So just kind of that top layer just describing what's going on. So for example, when we get the emails, the automatic thought might be something like, oh, I don't want to do this, or I don't want to open these. So to get to the next level of thought, we need to start taking our automatic thoughts and start asking the question, why? We might get answers like, I don't want to do this because, it could be bad news, or I don't want to do this because it'll be hard. And if we kind of ask why again, or maybe ask, why does that matter? And you might go, I don't want to do this because it's going to be annoying or hard. Why does that matter? It's like, well, maybe I shouldn't have to do it. What we're starting to get at there is what's called an underlying belief. What an underlying belief is, it's a rule or an attitude or an assumption about yourself, about other people, or about how the world works. So a rule might be something like, if this happens, then that happens. An attitude might be like, it should be like this, or it must be like that. And an assumption is kind of, where we jump to conclusions about how things are. So I suppose another way of thinking about this, and kind of takes away all the psychological language about it, is what is the story that we're telling ourselves here? That's what an underlying belief is really. We're telling ourselves a story around any given situation. So what I'm going to look to do using the cognitive behavioral model is we're going to try to put our finger on the behavior. We're going to try to put our finger on the emotions. We're going to try to put our finger on the thought or belief or the story that we're telling ourselves around whatever we're procrastinating about. Okay? So I suppose the next thing to look at, because we kind of have the behavior already, is what is the story that we're telling ourselves? So these guys, Linda Sapedin and Jack McGuire, wrote a book in the 2000s called The 6 Styles of Procrastination and How to Overcome Them. And in it, they kind of outline 6 stories that we tend to tell ourselves around procrastination. So the first 3 of these stories are very much linked to the emotion of anxiety or maybe a slight fear. So the first of these is the story that we tell ourselves of, if I try, then I'll fail. And how this leads to procrastination is like, well, if you don't think that what you're going to start is going to succeed, well, then what's the point in starting? So we procrastinate because it's like a fear of failure. Yeah? The second story that we often tell ourselves is very much linked to perfectionism. And that story is, unless it's perfect, I'm a failure. And the issue with this is, I suppose, if you're constantly trying to make something perfect, it can take an awful lot of your resources and your time and your energy. And so it can mean starting a task can seem an awful lot more daunting than it has to be. So that's perfectionism. The third story that we tend to tell ourselves is that if I don't accomplish all of this, then I'm a failure. This is what Sapien and Maguire characterizes someone who's called an overdoer, so they take on too much. So it's that person who can't say no, Because they take on too many things, they often fail to prioritize them. And because they fail to prioritize, they don't get the important things done. Yeah. And so that's how they procrastinate. So I think someone earlier was talking about they don't prioritize, and this is exactly this kind of story. And so the story behind that is, if I don't accomplish all of this, if I don't get everything done, then I'm a failure. Yeah? The second 3 stories that we associate with procrastination are associated with 2 different emotions, and that's boredom and frustration. So the first of these is, I perform but better under pressure. And this is for people or in the situation where you're leaving whatever it is until the last minute. And the reason you leave things until the last minute is that you think you need that little bit of excitement in order to get you through doing something you don't really want to do. The issue with this story, I perform better under pressure, is that if you compare your performance when you give yourself enough time than when you don't give yourself enough time, invariably your performance is better when you give yourself enough time. And a lot of the reason for this is things can go wrong at the last minute, or something unexpected can happen. The 5th story that we tend to tell ourselves, it's a very common one in terms of when we procrastinate, is I shouldn't have to do it. This can be linked to boredom, but generally can be linked to frustration. And it's often linked to kind of tasks given to us from other people. So, if any of you ever got a task from your boss where maybe you think it's a bit beneath you or it's a bit stupid or you shouldn't have to do it, probably the story you're telling yourself is, I shouldn't have to do this. Now, the problem with this story is that invariably when we get these tasks from these external sources, whether it's our boss or whether it's, the tax office or whether it's whatever, asking us to do our returns, at the end of the day, we probably do have to do it. And so the longer we put it off, we're just kind of annoying ourselves more than anything else. The final story that sometimes we tell ourselves in terms of procrastination is, I shouldn't have to work hard to fulfill my dreams. And I suppose the issue with this story is that if you speak to anyone who has kind of created anything amazing or done anything worthwhile even, invariably they would have had to work very, very hard in order to get there. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick poll if that's okay. What I want you guys to do is I want you to vote, or not vote, but I just want to indicate what story you think you're telling yourself. So around that thing, I asked you to draw the triangle around whatever it is you're procrastinating about. I want you to maybe indicate, this is anonymous, by the way, just in case you're wondering. And I just want you to indicate maybe what story, see if you can put your finger on what story you're telling yourself. Okay. It's interesting. Okay, nearly everyone's there. Very interesting. Okay, it's pretty much everybody. There's 2 people left to vote, if you have a second. Okay, I'm going to end it because I want to keep moving on. Okay. So, if you have a look at that, it's very interesting because I did a similar talk the other day and it was very different. So it seems to be, there's a certain amount of perfectionism in terms of this group that, if it's not perfect, I'm a failure, and that might be leading them to not start whatever it is. It's funny, I did this the other day, and the one that got absolutely no votes with about the same size group was that I shouldn't have to work hard to fulfill my dreams. So it's funny with different groups of people how you see the stories kind of differ. I think that's very interesting. Okay, so what I want you guys to do now is I want you to go to your triangle and we're going to start filling it in. So in the triangle, we've already got the behavior. Sorry, the poll results are coming back up there. So you've already got the behavior and the tidying up. The next thing I want you to do is I want you to go to the bottom left corner of your triangle. And I want you to try and put your finger on the emotion that you're feeling. So it's probably a little bit of anxiety, or maybe it's a little bit of boredom, not wanting to do it, or maybe it's a little bit of frustration. Does making sense? Are people able to figure out what emotion they're feeling? Okay, great. Okay, so the next thing I want you to do is I want you to I want you to try and fill in what your story is on this. So whatever you voted on in that poll, if you can write that on the top. And so out of that then, what we've got is, we've got the behavior that we're doing to procrastinate, we've got the emotion, and we've also got the story that we're telling ourselves around it. So we've got those kind of three kind of key responses. So we should be a bit more aware of what's going on. Is this making sense? Is everyone managing to fill this in? Maybe just let me know in the chat box, guys. I'm just curious. Cool. Okay. Making sense. Awesome. Okay. And so I suppose the idea with this is it's probably the story that you're telling yourself that is causing you to feel that emotion and in turn to lead to that behavior. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Okay. So, well, now that we have our story and we can see that the emotions it's leading to, and we can see the behavior it's leading to, what do we do about it? So just to make a point, we're a little bit late starting. So this final bit takes about 10 minutes. So we're recording this. So if anyone has to go at 12:30, we will be putting the recording up. Very sorry it went a little bit over, but I suppose we got a very good response, so it was a little bit late in starting. So what do we do about it? So once we have our story, the first thing we can do is challenge our story. So how do we go about doing that? Well, if I want to take, so the story I was telling myself around my procrastination about the weightlifting or about starting strength training was, if I try, then I'll fail. And this is because I suppose I've tried to do it a few times in the past. I've always either got too sore or my routine has kind of got knocked out. So I suppose I had a little bit of a belief, well, what's the point in starting this, because I'm only going to do it for a little while and it's not going to work out. So what do we do if we catch ourselves telling ourselves a story like this? Well, there's a method in using the cognitive behavioral method called Socratic questioning. So if you give that a little Google, you'll come up with a series of 9 or 10 questions. Now, we didn't have really time to run through 9 or 10 questions today, so I've kind of brought it down into kind of 2 key questions that we can ask ourselves. So the first is, you want to take your story, you want to write it down, you want to ask yourself the question, is it a realistic story? Why is it realistic and why isn't it realistic? So if I took my story, if I try, then I'll fail, and I ask myself, is it a realistic story? Well, I'd have to say partly yes, because in the past, I've kind of tried to do this and I've failed. But if I ask myself, why isn't it a realistic story? Well, then I could maybe start to look at it a little bit more. Well, maybe things are a little bit different now. Conditions are a bit different. I have more time. I have a bit more space. I'm a bit more committed. So it mightn't be the most realistic story that if I try, I'll fail. And so the next question you can ask is, what might be a more realistic story? And so if I was to put it to this example, if I try, then I'll fail, what might be a more realistic story in this instance? It's like, well, if I try, then you know what, I might fail, but I might also succeed because things are a little bit different now. Yeah. The second question you can ask yourself around the story you're telling yourself is, because it can be realistic and maybe you don't have a more realistic story, the second question you can ask yourself is it a helpful story? And so what this is about is, is it a story that's helping you achieve what you want to achieve? Is it a story that's helping you reach your goals? Or is it actually hindering? Is it actually stopping you? And so when I ask myself, is the story, if I try, then I'll fail, a helpful story? Well, then I have to say, no, it's not a helpful story, because it's meaning I'm not trying, I'm not starting, I'm not actually doing anything about the problem. And so I can ask myself, what might be a more helpful story? Well, so I thought about this one for a while, and I suppose the more helpful story I come up with is that, well, if I try, I might fail, but if I try, I might succeed. But also, if I've tried in the past and I've learned from those kind of mistakes, so maybe this time it'll be different. But also, even if I try this time and I fail again, well, then I can think of it as maybe I'll learn something again, and the next time I try, I'll be able to get it. So they're just two very powerful questions you can ask yourself around any kind of story or belief you're telling yourself. Is it realistic? What might be more realistic? Is it helpful? And what might be more helpful? Okay. So sorry, I don't really have, I'd like to give you guys a bit of time to kind of work on these yourselves and whatever, but I don't really have the time at the minute, unfortunately. Does that make sense to you guys? Did you guys find that helpful at all? Yeah? Okay, awesome. Cool. Okay. So the next strategy that I'm going to do, this is kind of two strategies in one, and this is more practical. So think of this as the hack, you know? So if you really need to get moving on something, you don't want to get in at, I suppose, to all the psychological stuff, and you just want to get moving, this is what you do. So it's called breaking it down and the Pomodoro method. So the first bit is breaking it down, and what's that about? Well, sometimes we've got big, I suppose, we can look at our issues or our problems or the task or that we have to do, whatever it is. It seems like a very big problem. And sometimes when something is very, very big, it can seem very, very vague because it's big, it's not specific, you can't really see the edges. And the issue with something that's big and vague is it can give us a sense of the unknown. And the issue with humans, I suppose, to an extent, is that we can have I suppose, what the unknown brings up in us is a slight feeling of anxiety, you know, because we're afraid of what we don't know to an extent. Another feeling that we can often feel due to something being big and vague, especially vague, is we feel a bit bored because when something is vague, we don't know what to do with it. When we don't know what to do, that's often when we feel bored. So what do we do with this big, vague, unknown problem? Well, we break it down. So we take that big goal and we break it down into smaller goals. And we're going to take those smaller goals and we're going to break them down again. We're going to do it in a very specific way with specific types of goals. So the first type of goal I'm going to show you to kind of, in terms of your goal setting, is what's called an end goal. So I'm going to use the example of me doing my master's thesis to show you how I did this, because this is the strategy that got me my master's thesis done and published in like 6 weeks. So what you do is you take your end goal, and in my instance, this was just get my master's thesis finished. It was to get done by a particular date or whatever. That doesn't really matter for now. But you want to take that end goal and you want to break it down. You want to break it down into what are called milestones. So milestones are kind of arbitrary points along the way that allow you to kind of measure your progress. So they're like key points. And the reason these are important is that when you break it down into your milestones, you can see if the strategies that you're using are helping you to, or if the strategies are useful or successful, or if they're working. Yeah, because if you don't have that, then if you can't really measure if what you're doing is successful, it can be very difficult to know if you're doing the right thing. So in terms of finishing my master's thesis, my milestones were I had to finish writing about the introduction, finish the statistical analysis, so this was gather all the data and all that boring stuff, and then finish the discussion. So I had to write about what I'd done. So just 3 major kind of points. What we want to do then is we want to take our milestone, we want to break that down into smaller goals. And again, this is about reducing the anxiety and making it more manageable. So from my finished introduction, all I had to do was finish writing about topic A, finish writing about topic B, finish writing about topic C, etc., etc. Then what you want to do is you want to take those smaller goals, I'm going to break them down into what's called a behavioral goal. And all a behavioral goal is, it's the action that you need to take in order to reach your smaller goals. So it's about doing the actual behavior. So for example, to finish topic A, I had to read about topic A and I had to write about topic A. They were the only 2 actions I had to take in order to get topic A finished. Now, the nice thing about behavioral goals is you can make them time bound. And this is important because it means you can do the behavior for a specific amount of time and get a sense of achievement. Yeah, so it feels good. So all you have to do is read for, say, 25 minutes, and then you feel like you've achieved something. Or you write about it for 25 minutes and you feel like you've achieved something. And this is important because it removes, I suppose, your sense of achievement from your result. It's all about your process. Yeah. So once you have those behavioral goals, whatever it is, you want to break it down, and you want to break this down into like 25-minute behaviors. So all you're doing is you're taking whatever behavior it is, whether it's write or read or whatever it is in your business or in your study or whatever, and you want to do that behavior for 25 minutes. So commit, fully focus, time it, take your phone out, and just commit to doing it. And the reason this works is no matter how horrible something is, you can usually commit to doing it for 25 minutes. So do it for 25 minutes. Then you want to take a 5-minute break. You want to time that as well. And what this does is it keeps you fresh. And then rinse and repeat that 6 times and have lunch. And so the reason this works is that once we kind of commit to doing something for 25 minutes, it's not that big a thing. You know, if we really force ourselves, we can make ourselves do pretty much anything for 25 minutes. But once you get moving, you get a sense of progress. You start to make a little bit of a dent in the problem. And that starts to feel good. So you're starting to work on positive emotion. The thing with procrastination, the key to it is just to get moving, is just to get started. And once you get started, you're fine to keep going. The 5-minute breaks are good because it keeps you fresh. And then so you're just doing these little 25-minute sprints. A nice thing about this is after a while, you can vary the amount that you're doing it. So for now, I will be working on maybe 50 minutes and then I'll take a 10-minute break if I'm procrastinating about something because I've kind of got to that point with it. But if it's something you're really procrastinating about, just say you're going to do it for 15 minutes and then give yourself a 5-minute break. And again, once you get moving, invariably, once you get stuck into it, you'll find that your motivation kind of takes care of itself. The last thing about it is with those 5-minute breaks, you can do whatever you want. I used to do like menial tasks. So I'd do stuff like I would do some laundry or do some cleaning around the house. And so then at the end of the day, I had a solid 6 hours work done and my house, etc. was clean. So I left time for kind of more social stuff. Okay, that's it. Sorry, it was a bit of a whirlwind tour of procrastination. Hope it wasn't too fast. Just a little conclusion. So I suppose we talked about the what, the how, and the why we procrastinate. That it's, I suppose, we procrastinate because we feel certain emotions. We feel those emotions because we tell ourselves certain stories. So hopefully using those 6 stories will help you to identify your story. So maybe it was, you know, if I try, I'll fail, or if it's not perfect, then I'm a failure. And we looked at how you can kind of challenge these stories and maybe rewrite them a little bit. And finally, I gave a kind of nice practical hack, which is kind of take that big kind of task, break it down again, break it down into the actual behaviors that you need to do, whatever it is, and then do them for 25 minutes and do those little sprints every time. Okay. So how did you guys find it? Was it useful? Maybe let me know in the chat box. I feel like it was very, very quick. All good? Awesome. Cool. Thank you so much. Awesome. Thanks a million, guys. Really appreciate it. Super. Cool. So guys, I do a consultation for free for anyone who's having issues with procrastination or motivation and stuff. We're going to send you an email later with the slides and stuff if you'd like it. And I'll put my contact details and stuff in there as well. So thank you very, very much. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll hand you back to Michelle. And sorry for going a little bit over time, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jayson, and thanks everyone as well for joining us.